My name is Amanda Sacks-Zimmerman. I'm a neuropsychologist who specializes in neurocognitive treatment for a variety of diagnoses and disorders. I'm happy to say that I've joined Acheron as a provider, and today I'm going to speak with you about our neurocognitive functions, how they impact our day-to-day life, and how factors like emotion can interfere with them, and how to make them better through cognitive remediation therapy or CRT. We're going to talk about the interconnectedness of our central cognitive functions, the complexity of attention, executive functioning, what it is and how it can go wrong, cognitive remediation therapy, neuroplasticity and ketamine, and then cognitive remediation combined with ketamine. We have three higher level cognitive functions that can all impact one another. Our ability to attend to information is central to our ability to process information into short-term memory. So sometimes when you might think you've forgotten information, it might actually be related to your attention to the information in the moment you're receiving it. Executive functioning also impacts our short-term memory and our attentional abilities. So executive functioning contributes to our ability to organize information. When we see categories, similarities, and differences in information, we can make associations based on what we already know. When we do this, we are better able to remember because we make that new information meaningful. When we don't do this and we don't effortlessly organize information, it does not get processed as well, and therefore we do not store it as efficiently and cannot retrieve it as efficiently. So because of this relationship with memory, executive dysfunction can contribute to memory difficulties. Executive functioning, or our executive decision maker, tells us what information is important to attend to and what we can filter out. When our executive functioning is not working well, our attention can be without guidance, and therefore we get lost and overwhelmed by large amounts of information. Therefore, executive functioning can impact our attentional abilities. And then finally, attention capacity, or how we focus, can negatively impact our ability to utilize executive functioning. So if we start to lose attention in the middle of doing something, even if we have the best laid out plan, our poor sustained attention can get in the way of executing that goal. How is executive function different from our other cognitive functions, like memory and attention? Well, our executive functions are how we approach the world and how we decide to conduct ourselves in the world. And for this reason, executive functions are essential to our day-to-day functioning and our survival in this modern world. They also play a large role in how well we use our other cognitive functions, which we'll talk about later. So executive functions can be divided into organizational and regulatory abilities. What do we mean by that? So by organization, that includes how we gather information and how we organize information to guide our behaviors, including how we go about doing a task and what we choose to pay attention to. Regulation involves controlling our responses to what's in front of us. When do we start doing something? When is it time to finish that something? Are we doing things correctly? Evaluating the consequences of our actions. This is all about self-monitoring or regulation. So for example, you see a wonderful dessert in front of you. You may be tempting to devour it, but your executive system lets you know eating it would conflict with other goals, such as losing weight and health. To break it down even further, executive functioning is responsible for most everything that goes into our behavior. Sometimes we use our executive functions so automatically and without awareness that we're even using a cognitive process. Our executive functions help us to form goals for the day, for the week, for the month. They help us plan and organize our approach to tasks. They help us figure out solutions to problems and making decisions. They help us monitor our responses to our behaviors. They help us know when it is time to start something or switch to something else. And they help us know when it is time to be flexible and change our approach. Basically, in short, our executive functions make us human and are fundamental to how we exist in the world. Most of the tasks we do on a daily basis require executive function. Everything from knowing the steps involved to preparing a meal, something small like that, from something large, like how to plan a large event like a wedding. When executive functions are not working effectively, we can run into all sorts of problems in our functioning. What do these problems look like? We can make errors on new tasks that are coming our way, including missing a step or not knowing the sequence of steps to complete the task. With problem solving, we can become frozen or paralyzed because of how many options there are to solve a given problem and not knowing which one to choose. When new information comes at us, we might not make attempts to try to place that information into a meaningful context or how it applies to anything we might have just put into action. So that information just goes in one ear and out the other. And little do we know, emotional regulation is an executive function. And when it doesn't work, there is impulsivity or disinhibition. So a tendency to say something you might regret later, which contributes to a negative interaction, all about executive function. With attentional control, executive dysfunction can lead to our attention being uncontrolled, feeling overwhelmed, not knowing where you need to focus yourself, especially in work and school environments. And this is a big take home point. Many aspects of ADD or ADHD are related to executive functioning rather than attention. So here are some examples of when our executive functions aren't working so well. You might not have realized you paid your internet service twice in the past month, or you might forget to buy all the items you need to start a project. Many issues can happen from executive dysfunction. However, our wisdom regarding executive functions grow naturally as we age. Over time and through experience, we can have an increased ability to reason and judge situations and therefore make confident decisions based on these judgments. Also, over time and through experience, we have created cognitive templates like blueprints for how a variety of situations can facilitate problem solving or ways of approaching a task. For example, we might have developed a strategy for taking a deep breath, pausing, analyzing before we react to a difficult interpersonal situation. We might have also developed a strategy to put together a grocery list or actually go into the grocery store. But the thing to know is that executive functions do not develop automatically over time, the way our language and memory abilities develop. We need to learn or acquire these executive functions. So some people have natural abilities in some areas of executive functioning, and some people have had models of great executive functions in their home or at school. And those people can take for granted that the skill is so automatic and comes naturally. But when executive functions are underdeveloped or were never learned, that's when we run into problems, even when all other cognitive functions are working just fine. So where do executive functions live in the brain? They live in the frontal lobe, and that's really the largest kind of real estate that the brain has. So therefore, it's a perfect place for executive CEO to sit, because in some ways, it is literally barking out orders and controlling us. The front part of the brain is the largest part of the cortex. It's the last part of the brain to develop in evolution as humans, which makes sense because it's responsible for all the executive functions that essentially make us human, being complex, goal-directed creatures, where we're looking for meaning and improvement and change in our lives. So executive functions are situated in an ideal place to have what we call top-down control, or control of all other cognitive functions, including memory, attention, and even the use of language. So I think it's important to incorporate the concept of attention and attentional difficulties when we are discussing executive functioning, because so much of our attentional problems come from this concept of attentional control, which, as I mentioned earlier, is actually an executive function. Attention and executive function are intimately related. And as I mentioned, some ways ADD can be considered an executive dysfunction because a large part of attention is how we make decisions about where we direct our attention. At its basic level, attention is the ability to consciously, volitionally, and behaviorally maintain and sustain information in your mind. So what does attention really include? It's multifactorial. It includes selection. What out of a whole lot of information is important to attend to and process, and what is not? What can we ignore? Can we resist distraction when we are engaging our attention to something else? Can we hold our attention across periods of time? Finally, this concept of working memory is an attentional function. It's the ability to hold information long enough to think about it, manipulate it, and use it. And so we'll talk about this idea of working memory when it comes to cognitive rehabilitation and cognitive remediation. All of these attention functions require control of our minds, and that is an executive function. So if you get nothing else, please get that issues with attention or attention deficit have to do with executive function. So the bad news is that attention and executive functions are vulnerable, and they can be negatively impacted by these factors you see. Fatigue, medications, and medical conditions can bring down our ability to engage this very high level cognitive function. Executive functioning requires a lot of energy, clarity of thought, and alertness. So if we are tired, physically compromised in some way, taking medications that wear on us, we are less able to use our executive functions. If our mood is anxious or depressed, we become overwhelmed with these emotions, so we do not have the bandwidth to use these high-powered executive abilities. There is also a negative cycle that can set in where we react to attention difficulties and executive dysfunction with frustration and anxiety, which further degrades our ability to engage in our attention effectively. So the good news is that these factors are modifiable. In other words, we can change them. We can help executive functioning and attentional abilities with sleep hygiene, exercise, managing our medical conditions, and finally, mood management. When we are depressed, negative self talk can interfere with attention and executive functioning. And we'll speak about that later on about how CRT or cognitive remediation therapy can help us become mindfully aware of the impact of negative self talk on attention. So I want everyone to kind of take a moment to take in this slide because this is applicable to all of us, independent of the psychiatric disorder. So I like to tell people that the mind, which is the domain of psychiatry, and the brain, which is the domain of neurology and neuropsychology, are one and the same organ and two sides of the same coin. So it is important to recognize ways in which emotional functioning can impact attention and executive functioning. In depression, the capacity for cognitive functioning significantly decreases, and that's well known in the clinical research and literature. Psychological difficulties such as anxiety and depression, part and parcel with that is having ruminations or repetitive, preoccupying negative thinking. Ruminations and preoccupations take a lot of mental space and therefore can contribute to attentional difficulties and can impair executive functioning capacities. Moreover, these psychological symptoms, as well as anxious personality features that are associated with negative beliefs about cognitive functioning, can compound the issue even further, reducing attention. So targeting emotional difficulties that negatively impact attention and executive functioning is essential for improvement and is an essential piece of CRT, cognitive remediation. So I thought this was an important slide to add because of these discrepancies that can occur very naturally in all of us. What do we mean by capacity versus functioning? Well, capacity basically means the combination of capabilities that define what a person can achieve. The potential to perform a certain task or functioning, while functioning refers to the actual performance or doing or execution of that task. Similarly, the knowing-doing gap refers to the disconnect between what people know they want, know what they should do, and even know how to do it, but there is a gap that lies what they eventually do. We commonly see these discrepancies, and there are two ways of describing the same underlying issue. And the root contributor to these discrepancies can often be executive dysfunction. So, for example, when organizing an approach to a task is compromised or underdeveloped, simply having the knowledge to do that task might not lead to effective execution and outcome. So if you ever walk around feeling like you're not achieving what you can, think about how executive functioning or executive dysfunction might contribute to these discrepancies.